It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for our second keynote of the day. Terry Lefton is, like myself, a proud native Philadelphian who, though we have both left our hometowns, still keep our sports teams and affiliated institutions, in Terry's case, Temple University, very close to the heart. So we all know that this week is the week that the Eagles turn it around and start playing up to potentially you can catch that game on Sunday Night Football on NBC after Football Night in America. So Terry's going to take it over from here and introduce our second keynote speaker of the day, Jon Miller. Terry?
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Just like every class you ever took, no one wants to sit in front, so there are some seats in front if you want them. We promise not to throw things at you. Jon Miller has been at NBC more than 40 years, which makes me feel old because I've been talking to him a bunch of those years. But all of them good ones. He's president of programming at NBC Sports and NBC Sports Net, which means the properties in his portfolio include such small ones as the NFL, the NHL, Notre Dame, Triple Crown, the Premier League, F1, Tour de France. Not to be forgotten, the National Dog Show, which has become a Thanksgiving staple, along with various golf and sports properties, which I probably forgot about. But suffice it to say, he's got a pretty good mixture of sports and a pretty good vantage point. Jon started in sales for NBC Olympics in '78, is that right? Which was a time when...
Most people here weren't born then, so don't feel bad.
I think that's a time when cable meant something on a wooden spool. So I guess that's a good place to start, Jon. How much different was it then?
Well, you know, it's funny. I've been very fortunate to have a front row seat, certainly the last 30 years in NBC Sports, but even prior to that, just being part of the company. When I started with NBC, I was the first maven at NBC, which is someone that they hired to train in all the different areas of the television stations business. And at the time, it was just ABC, CBS, and NBC. There was no Fox. There was no ESPN, although they were, starting to develop. HBO had just recently launched. And so we pretty much had the landscape to ourselves. And now you fast forward to where we are in 2019. You've got, obviously, ABC, CBS, NBC, but you've got ESPN, you've got Fox, you've got Turner, you've got multiple very powerful regional sports networks. You have the direct-to-consumer brands, whether it's the Amazons and the SVODs like that, or you have the actual sports-specific SVODs like the Zone and Flow Sports. So the business has evolved and changed. It's important that you be willing to change along with it. Otherwise, you get left at the door. And so that's what's been so interesting for me.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest question we ask every day at SBJ is how a business that's been largely based on linear TV rights fees gets to the next model, and of course, sort of within that, what the next model is. That might be enough for a half hour right there, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think we're very fortunate in that our parent, NBC Universal, is now owned by Comcast. I've worked for 3 different parents at the time I've been with NBC. When I first started off, we were owned by RCA, and then we're sold to GE, and then GE sold us to Comcast in 2011. The interesting thing is that Comcast, in addition to being a distributor, really understands our business, and they invest and they embrace our business. And by that I mean they encourage us to go out and try new things and take some risks and embrace the change that's going on. So when you talk about being a linear company, every deal that we do now has its linear component, and whether that's broadcast and cable, but it also has a digital component. So with the Premier League, which is a property that we're very proud of, that we're beginning our 7th season, we started our 7th season this year, we have 30 games on broadcast on NBC. We'll have 220 games on NBCSN and some overflow games on CNBC. And then we'll take another 140 games and we'll stand them up in an NBC Sports vertical called NBC Sports Gold. And that way, if you're a Premier League fan, you're able to follow your team, because every team in the Premier League will have a minimum of 4 games on Gold. But it also gives you a lot of additional Premier League content. It allows you to watch all the games on a full event replay. But that's how we've done it. So we've been able to combine both broadcast, cable, and digital to help amass whatever kind of revenues we can in order to acquire those rights.
Okay. You know, kitchen table research is always the best kind, so I'm still the idiot that watches 3.5 hours of a football game. My son will come in at the end, and he's got every highlight on his phone. So how do you adjust to that? I guess what you're saying, it's a hybrid model now. There's no getting around it.
It is a hybrid model. I mean, the thing that I always like to say is that technology has not been great to the entertainment industry. It hasn't necessarily been great to music or to news. It's been wonderful for sports. Because sports is the one thing that you, A, have to watch live. I mean, the sports that you really care about, that you oftentimes will watch with other people. It becomes a communal thing. And so that's one of the things that we have going for us. So while highlights and fantasy and sports betting and all these other things are important cogs in the wheel, you're still going to want to watch the event itself. And that's one of the reasons why so many leagues are focused on eyeball retention. So you'll hear baseball talking about how do we make the games faster, how do we make them more compelling. The NFL is obviously concerned about flags and games going way too long. But at the end of the day, you want people engaged, watching on whatever platform you can deliver the product to them, whether it's a phone, an iPhone, a tablet, a desktop, you name it. But they're going to deliver that live product to them one way or another.
Is the value there? Because, I mean, basically you're doing the almost shorter units, but almost the same thing it's always been in TV, right? We're selling video ads across. I mean, and you know, people my son's age or this audience, they don't have a lot of tolerance for. That's not even long form commercials, but I call them long form in that sense.
Right. I think that's where the creativity comes in between the broadcaster, the league, and the advertiser.
Right.
And I see more groups coalescing to try to deliver that message and to try to take advantage of it. Nobody wants to sit through a 2.5-minute break during a football game.
Right.
You know, one of the things that you see in a Premier League soccer game on NBC is it runs straight through with no commercial interruption. We have some drop downs and some squeeze backs, but our commercial, you know, enterprises are usually on the corners or in the shoulder programming. And then there's signage and virtual, and there are other ways to advantage it and to reach the customer. But you need to be able to make sure that it gets measured by Nielsen or whoever it may be, because that's really your report card.
And there's a limit on the other end, I guess, but I was talking to the head of sales at Yes this week, and he's like, yeah, we're doing more of those 6-second commercials, and we get a premium. It's not, you know, it's not 20% of a 30-second spot. It's more than that.
Right,
so,
and you'll also notice a lot in, you know, certainly sports like golf and motorsports where there's continuous action. You'll see us doing side by side. You know, you'll see the in-play commercials where you'll squeeze the screen back to 50%, and then you'll have the commercial in there.
Right. Have advertisers adjusted? Have you adjusted? I mean, your job, I suppose, is you have to convince them your scale's important, you know? And they'll say, oh, it's targeting. But that's where you are right now, right?
Well, look,
and leagues definitely want scale, I would think, yeah.
We like to say that when you know, network television is still the biggest game in town.
Yeah.
We are Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon. I mean, to Portland, Oregon. So we reach across the entire country. We are still the best bargain out there if you want to reach the maximum number of eyeballs and the maximum penetration.
Right.
But you still have to figure out ways to help advertisers target, and that's where some of our cable properties come in and some of our niche properties come in to further identify and get people there.
Okay. And the, you know, the subscription side is interesting. I think you were saying before you've already had a good amount of subscriptions on the Rugby 7 championships coming up, which you know, it's probably my favorite niche property now. It's still tiny in this country, but they're paying a lot for that, right?
So we pride ourselves in trying to find some new properties that we can expose, give some oxygen to, hopefully grow in this country. We're currently in the middle of the Rugby World Cup, which is taking place in Japan, which is a 6-week event. The quarterfinals start this weekend. There are 48 games. But the time difference with Tokyo really doesn't work in favor of a linear television audience. So we put more than half the games behind a paywall and offered it up as a subscription product, and it's done very, very well for us. Now this weekend, you'll start to see more product on NBCSN, and eventually you'll see the semifinals and the finals on NBC. But rugby is very much of a niche sport, much like lacrosse is and stuff like that. But we find if you work with the organizers and you have a sensible, reasoned approach to getting in the business, we can really help them grow their profile here.
And you anticipated my next question. Since you were in the lacrosse business this year, tell us a little bit about Premier and how that worked out in its first year.
So I did not grow up playing lacrosse, but I've heard about it and seen a lot of people and know what a popular sport it is. Paul Rabel, who's one of the iconic figures in the sport, and his brother Mike came to see us 2 years ago with a concept of a league that would really have strong player support, strong financial backing, and a really unique proposition in the sense that they were going to be almost like a barnstorming tour.
Right.
So instead of having 6 home teams, all 6 teams would play in the same venue on a weekend, saves a lot on production costs, takes a lot of pressure off of local ticket sales, really kind of engages the community. And so we were all in to do it, and we got together with them, and it's been very successful in its first year, and we're looking forward to year 2.
Okay. Another big question, and this is purely crystal ball, but I think this is one everyone's asking is, when the big streamers come in and start paying, the kind of dollars that linear TV companies have over the years. I mean, basically Amazon's paying coffee money for their NFL rights, and then you see what other people are doing. It's like, when we were talking before, Jon was saying, well, yeah, they're competition, but what's their end game? What do they get out of it? So.
I'm still trying to figure out what the end game is on the. We're all watching the SVOD space. We all hear about that the next round, all these guys are going to be at the table, and I'm sure they will be. Whether or not they see the returns on it or not remains to be seen. If you have to pay the hundreds of millions of dollars in rights that a lot of these big properties are going to demand, you're going to have some return. Eventually, your investors are going to say, why are we doing this? We see the value from a broadcaster side and a cable side, whether it's in distribution, whether it's in advertising, whether it's in retransmission, whether it holds that bundle together. So we understand the value, but you also have to put yourself in the shoes of a commissioner and the owners of a league. Do they want to marginalize their product by taking it off such a big, expansive platform where you get such great marketing? I mean, the NHL is one of the properties that we have this great relationships that we're very proud of, that what we've done with the NHL, we've grown it over the course of time. It's been on NBC since 2006. So now we're in 2019, so we've had it a while, and we've really watched every year the NHL continue to grow and get better and better. That's a credit to Gary Bettman and his teams, not only his teams, the actual teams, but the group of people he's got working with. And they're not going to want to walk away, I don't think, from that kind of promotion, marketing, exposure, being showcased the way they are.
And your whole thing in your last rights package was, we're going to put all the playoff games on, right?
Right.
One way or another, they're going to be on some cable net. So then, okay, I think that's the next one. Well, PGA maybe, but we'll get to that. What are they up in 2 years, Jon?
Well,
and so factor that in.
Deals, right? There are deals that come up at the end of 21-22 season, and those rights holders are starting to have conversations, as you would expect, just to gauge the market, doing market checks, not only talking to us, but talking to the other guys out there. Look, the guys at ESPN, the guys at Fox do a tremendous job, and you would be crazy if you're a rights holder not to go out and explore the market and see what your value is. And they'll also talk to the streaming opportunities and stuff like that, and then they'll come to the table and make a decision just like we will. Sure. But that process begins now and will be going for the next several months.
Okay. You were involved in the first iteration of XFL. I hear rumor they're coming back. So what are your thoughts on that?
We could spend an entire panel.
I know.
on the first XFL season in 2001. Look, I never underestimate Vince McMahon and what he can do once he puts his mind and his resources and assets behind it. I think they have a much different approach now than they did in 2001. We're not part of the current XFL deal. They've made deals with ABC, ESPN, and Fox, and they've gotten a terrific broadcast schedule from both of those. Those are two great companies that will know how to produce, promote, market the sport in conjunction with the XFL. But I will be honest with you, I have a real difficult time feeling that there's a compelling need for football right after the Super Bowl. I have always felt that you need a break. I think one of the things that makes the NFL so strong is that when that Super Bowl ends and you've seen the best football out there to be seen, you want to take a break. You now focus on the Final Four, the tournament. You've got Augusta in April. You've got the NHL and the NBA playoffs beginning. You've got the beginning of baseball season. There's a cycle and a rhythm to the way people watch and consume sports. And so I think one of the things that we learned when we had the XFL, we started the week after the Super Bowl. We did a monster rating that first game in Las Vegas, where Las Vegas played the New York, New Jersey Hitmen, and that's when people were introduced to characters like He Hate Me and stuff like that. But over time, that number eroded. Now, that was also had a lot to do with the quality of football. And I think the quality of football this time will be significantly better. They've got a really strong football leader in Oliver Luck at the head, and they've got a great commercial officer in Jeffrey Pollack who's leading it. So it's a much more focused, concentrated, organized effort this time than I think it was in 2001.
Will they still have hot tubs in the end zone with cheerleaders?
I don't think so. I don't.
Just one of my favorite things about it. Throw McMahon out, throw everything else out. Just the concept, because I've been begging this question for a while. Could spring football ever work?
You know, that's a good question. I think the appetite for football in this country is pretty strong, but it's strong for good football. I think people want to watch good quality football, and I think that's evidenced in the fact that there have been so many attempts at trying to do it, and none of them have really ever worked. I think timing is also important. The last one that was at all, in my mind, successful was the USFL, which had a very strong run, had some really strong talent that played in it. But the key to the USFL, it was a June, July, product. It was not up against, it was not going into the teeth of a very competitive sports landscape. So I think if the quality of the football is good and the timing of the seasons are good, I think you could find it. There's certainly enough players out there. There are enough people who love the game. I think with the advent of sports betting, people are looking for a reason to do it. But if you don't have a connection to these teams and they're just putting football on to put football on, I think it's hard.
Yeah, USFL was just another institution that couldn't survive Donald Trump. You mentioned...
For the record, I'm not saying a word, so this is not a political...
I am. You set it up for me, though. You did mention betting, and I did want to get there because legal sports betting is supposed to, it probably does, encourage and foment greater engagement, long run, short term, better ratings. Have we seen that yet? Do you expect to see that? How much of a factor do you expect that? Will it grow ratings?
I'm not necessarily a contrarian because I will occasionally play in that space. I believe that people who want to bet on football are already betting on football and have found a way to bet on football. There's just, now that it's more legal and more available, I think it's great. I think it actually will help other sports, maybe even more than it helps football. But I think there is something to be said about engagement and stuff, but I also think we've got to be a little bit careful that sports betting is going to be the panacea for declining ratings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't buy that.
Okay.
I think it's more incumbent upon the sport itself to fix whatever wrongs that they have to make their sport compelling, and they can't turn around and say, well, if we have sports betting, we're going to double our ratings. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Also, just from an advertising perspective, it's not going to happen on the national level for a long time.
Right.
The regionals, we've already seen it. In some cases, it's the second biggest after cars in terms of categories. But for you, that won't happen for a while.
I don't think that happens for a while. I don't think it's going to be a national betting platform for a long time. I think there are a lot of states that will never permit it. And so I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, which is why I think it's a huge asset and a huge benefit to the RSNs and the regional sports business.
Yeah, I think it already has, and we'll get there. Right. And they may see the first ratings bumps as well. You've had experience on and off with motorsports, NASCAR, and what I wanted to focus on first. They've been trying to I'll mix metaphors, right their ship for a while now. I've been saying for a while that the next big story there is when they cease being a family business. But what do you think of where they are right now?
I think they have a terrific management team led by Steve Phelps, who has been in our business for a long time and is really an exceptional leader. Yeah. I think the fact that they've been able to bring NASCAR and ISC together under one roof will make it a much more streamlined, much more effective product for them moving forward. We're excited about their new sales model as they continue to go out and find partners that they will flow all the way through the sport. Right. So I think we're excited. We've made a long-term bet on the sport. Right. It's got a big following. It's our job to make sure that they continue to stabilize and help get their house in order and build these stars up and continue with the storytelling. Our executive producer, Sam Flood, knows this sport as well as anybody, and he's put a great team together along with great talent like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Steve Letarte and the group that they've got, and Rick Allen. So I think it's compelling. And then we've obviously branched out and expanded our motorsports portfolio with Indycar.
Right.
This was our first year having all of Indycar. The Indianapolis 500 showed a huge rating increase, which in our world today, ratings increases are hard to come by. So we're excited about that level, and we're bullish on the sport in the fact that I think it will continue to make the right changes to grow.
Okay. I guess I should preface any NFL question by saying we should all have their problems. So I will say we should all have their problems. But to me, the water cooler talk, if anyone has a water cooler anymore, is still too much about officiating and not enough about the game.
Look,
how big a problem is that?
I think it's an issue that a lot of people like to talk about because it's out there and it's apparent. But as my wife would say to me, that's a white wine problem.
1%?
Yeah. I mean, look, the sport is dominant and continues to expand its dominance over everything else that's out there. The fact that we all are talking about it as much as we do is pretty impressive. Look, I'm a fan, so I don't like to either go to a game or watch a game on television and have to have my head on a swivel and look for a yellow flag after every play. And I think they're genuinely trying to address it because they don't want it either. The guys who own the teams and the guys who are involved with the league want the game to be as compelling a product as it can be. So nobody wants to see a lot of flags. But by the same token, these officials have to make split-second decisions in a very pressure-filled situation that involves making a call. And so far be it from me to say whether or not these guys are doing the right thing or not.
Well, there's also safety versus officiating and game, and I don't know where that mix is now, but it doesn't seem quite right.
Well, I think, look, they've done a good job trying to protect quarterbacks as much as they can. I think we've all seen that, the quarterbacks really are such an integral part of making the game popular, and so that's come into play. Somebody's not going to like the fact that they throw a flag on what's a questionable late hit or not, but at the end of the day, if they're trying to protect the quarterback, they're going to do that.
Okay, and I'm sure if it hasn't been out there already, we're in for a week of how Mahomes' injury is going to kill the NFL. They were putting him out there as their poster child.
I don't think look, he's a great quarterback. He's a lot of fun to watch. I think you can see what happens when you lose a player like that. We're particularly impacted because we have the Green Bay-Kansas City game next Sunday night, and I don't know if he's going to be able to play or not. We certainly hope he is, but we would never want to see a guy risk further injury. But the fact of the matter is the NFL's got great stars out there, and they do as good a job as any league of showcasing those stars.
Absolutely. And you've got one flex left, is that right? Or
well, in the first 10 weeks you do, and then once we get past week 11, we can flex. But just to make sure everybody understands, people talk about flexing games. Flexing games is not necessarily designed to give NBC the best game that's out there. It's designed to make sure that we don't have a bad game. So if there's a game that's on the schedule that at the beginning of the season when the schedule was made in April that doesn't look as compelling come the first week of December, we will then go and petition the league and give the league a couple of alternative choices. And it's the league who makes the decision on what they do, if they do anything.
Okay, one more from me, and then we'll go to the audience. We talked about rugby as an interesting niche sport. Any other niche sports that you think have, if they were a stock, would you throw some money at?
Well, look, I think rugby is interesting because it's Olympic tie-in, but the rugby version is the sevens in the Olympics. We now have that back, all the sevens back on NBC, which we're very excited to have them back in the house. I think we're open for business. We've seen some of these new basketball leagues that are out there, the TBT, and there's some other basketball leagues on the horizon.
Well, you got 3-on-3 with the Olympic tie-in.
There's a 3-on-3 with the Olympic tie-in, which we're going to take a look at. But I think that what we like to tell people is that we're open for business. We're not afraid to embrace a new property. I think the one thing that we're trying to get our arms around is the esports space, because I think that there's esports and e-gaming. I'm not sure that first-person shooter games are the direct type of thing that we should involve with our brand. I don't know. They're great. They've got huge
although
following.
That's mostly industry, right?
Right. But I think that we're trying to find out a way, because it's certainly a popular genre, and a lot of young people are engaging with it, and we want to find a way to embrace it as well. I just don't think that we have yet found the right.
Yeah, I mean, you've got
the right
Twitch,
play.
obviously, and you've got the stuff Turner's done, but in terms of linear, no one's really done much, right?
No, I think it's a tough linear play.
It is.
It is a tough linear play. To watch people play video games is not something. And it's more along the lines of if you look at somebody's playing FIFA or Madden or iRacing or some of these other things that are sports and that are properties that we're directly associated with, maybe that makes some sense. But
And
but
it's-
the
and then you
first-person
get the
shooter
support.
games are a little bit harder for us.
Exactly. Okay, questions? Right here.
I have a question about preseason versus regular season and viewership. Given that preseason games in the NFL have a significantly lower viewership and attendance rate from regular season games, what's your opinion on potentially, taking away a couple of those weeks of preseason and adding a few more regular season weeks?
Well, this is a discussion that gets thrown around a lot, and you're right about the preseason games and the idea of having to charge people full price for preseason games when the starters aren't even dressing, much less playing, is a problem that the NFL is seeing. And I think that they would agree that reducing the number of preseason games makes sense. Look, they have no preseason games in college, and LSU and Florida and Georgia, Notre Dame all seem to do fine, coming out of the gate. As far as adding regular season, I'm not sure adding regular season is the answer. I think if it were me as a fan, I'd rather see 2 more teams make the playoffs. I would rather see an expanded playoff format when you get to the end of the year, as opposed to more regular season games. Because right now we have 16 regular season games. Let's just say, for argument, you added 2 more games. I'm not so sure, and you'd have to expand the season later into January. I'm not so sure that a 3-14 team against a 4-12 team, or 4-15, is all that compelling. But I do think the idea is if you could find a way to get more teams into the playoffs, that makes your regular season that much more compelling and exciting, and that's going to have a lot more value, I think, for your media partners. But the NFL, I know, has been looking at this, talks about it with the Players Association, and they'll at some point come to a resolution, and then they'll come and tell us, and we'll figure out how to deal with it.
Interesting dichotomy there, too, because this may not be the way it eventually nets out, but what I'm told now is the union, the players, and most of the coaches don't want more regular season games. Of course, the owners do. So that's an interesting battle if those forces shape up that way. The other thing is, it's increasingly, to me, becoming consumer fraud because as an Eagles fan, none of my skill players play in the preseason. As a result, the first 4 or 5 weeks are a worse product. So I think they have to do something about that. Questions? Right there. Yep.
Jon, Terry, thanks for the discussion. As your programs and your platforms evolve, I'd imagine that your on-air talent has had to do so as well. How are you getting more creative about sourcing on-air talent, and how has their roles changed over time?
Well, we are very fortunate in that we have one of the strongest development programs in the business, because we have the good fortune to have 8 regional sports networks that are part of our group, as well as the Olympic Channel. So we are constantly able to bring in new talent, screen new talent, get new talent involved. And if you look at a lot of the people who are on our air, most of them came from that, other than the senior guys who've been around a long time, have come from that RSN. Ahmad Fareed, who's doing rugby, came from our RSN in San Francisco. We've got a tremendous number of players. Also, I forgot to mention the Golf Channel. So we get to screen talent from there. So that's how we're bringing a lot of talent. The RSNs have so much great professional product, as well as studio programming that they get to take advantage of. So that's really how we're finding a lot of our talent that we move up the ranks.
Good deal. Right there. Yeah. Yeah.
So FIFA just announced that they had a record-breaking 1.1 billion viewers for the Women's World Cup. What is NBC's focus on putting more women's sports on the channel?
Well, we clearly we saw that, and obviously we had the Women's World Cup on Telemundo, which we were very happy with. It did tremendous numbers. We provide a lot of avenues for women's sports, whether it's through the LPGA on the Golf Channel, through our Olympic programming with gymnastics, with swimming, with diving, with track and field. We've had some initial conversations with some other soccer leagues. We now have all of the women's rugby sevens that are out there, as well as the Women's Rugby World Cup. So we are always in the market for it, and we don't think it's just something you do. We think it's good business. So we're looking for those opportunities when they're out there, and have taken advantage of it. But we think it's a very viable marketplace. We like to see sponsors coming in and supporting what we're doing as well, because we think that's another way to validate that investment. But you're going to continue to see more of it.
I saw one over there. No? Right there, fine. Yep.
My name's Tilo. I'm working in the soccer industry, so I just wanted to know, you elevated the Premier League to a new level. What was the biggest challenge for you, to take a soccer product, which was kind of alien to the market, and then put it, on such a qualitative level?
So I will tell the story of the Premier League, how we got to it real quickly, because it's kind of a funny story. I did not grow up like a lacrosse fan, a soccer fan either, but I had an 18-year-old son who was a soccer nut and played FIFA, watched with his friends. And on a Saturday morning, I would go out early to go play golf with friends at 7 o'clock and tiptoe downstairs and try to be quiet. And sure enough, there was Robbie sitting on the couch with a couple of buddies. And I would say, "You're 18 years old. You're supposed to be asleep. Don't teenagers sleep till..." He said, "Dad, Man United's on." Or a friend of his said, "Liverpool's playing." And I was like shocked. And I'd say, "Okay." And they would find it wherever it was. And at that time, the Premier League was scattered on a bunch of different platforms. And I would come home 5 hours later, and they would still be there looking for another. And I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And I've always said you can learn a lot from your kids. So when the merger happened and the Premier League rights became available, I began a dialogue with a man named Richard Scudamore, who was the CEO of the Premier League. And we kind of developed a model where we thought we could really do a lot for them. But what it would mean is creating, in a sense, a new day part. Because Saturday and Sunday mornings have always been a wasteland in sports television. We looked at that as an opportunity where you had hunting and fishing shows and maybe some highlights and some time sales on there. You'd be lucky to get 40 or 50,000 viewers for any one of these programs. We're now seeing viewership upwards of 750,000 people on a Saturday and Sunday morning. It really involved going all in, which we did. We have a great producer in Pierre Moussa, who's assembled a great team led by Arlo White on site in the UK, and Rebecca Lowe and Robbie Earle and Robbie Musto here in our studio programming. But the thing that I made very clear internally here in our pitch to the Premier League is that we were not the network of soccer. We were the network of the Premier League, and we intended to give the Premier League the same type of treatment that we give Sunday Night Football, or that we give the NHL on NBC, or that we give any of our other premier properties, to make them feel like they were really important. And I think that we've been very fortunate and that the public has responded and recognized what we've done. We're also blessed in the fact that the Premier League has these household names out there: Tottenham, Liverpool, Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal. So that really helps us build that brand up and establishes them as the premier league in that sport too.
One more from me, and I think we're wrapping up.
Okay.
I'll put you on the spot. Who's going to play in the Super Bowl? I should say, who's going to play the Patriots in the Super Bowl, if indeed you believe that's who it is? I'm not a Patriots fan by any means.
Well, I'm going to go against the tide, and I'm going to say the Baltimore Ravens are going to be the team from the AFC, because I think Lamar Jackson is an
great, isn't he?
unbelievable talent, and John Harbaugh, a fellow Miami Redhawk, is a brilliant coach. And then on the NFC side, well, I would love to see my Giants there. I think it's still
okay, we have to wrap up now.
A couple of years away. A couple of years away. I would not underestimate what Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers can do.
Green Bay is a good pick. I'll go with San Francisco. Their defense looks really good.
Okay.
And I hate to say it, but Patriots. Thank Jon for coming, please. Appreciate it.
Thank you.